more than a half an hour for us to get an ambulance to an accident scene, simply because we've got volunteers who run a lot of our ambulance teams. We've got to get them, first we've got to let them know, so we've got to tone them out. Then we've got to get them to the ambulance station, pick up the rig, go to the scene. And I know, my dad's the fire chief over in Pleasant Mountain, I know that there's some days when they tone that ambulance out a couple of times because they can't find a driver. So we know that we sometimes could have a delay in getting that 911 care there. Luckily, we've got Minuteman Station not too far away. We do have the hospitals are manned with medics, but if you're in one of the outlying areas of the county, it may take a little bit of time to get somebody to you. So we're going to alert someone when we suspect this. So I forgot to tell you, there are a couple of extra special pictures in this presentation. This one in particular. And the reason why we show it is because we have to know what we're identifying here. And the type of bleeding that we're talking about today, we're not talking about a little paper cut. We're not talking, you can cut yourself pretty good and not be at the risk of a severe bleeding injury. But the types of wounds that we're talking about here would be the kinds of wounds that we get from a gunshot, the kinds of wounds that we would get from a partially or fully severed limb, or the one that we get considered. Sounds like I'm on the ski patrol over at Elk Mountain, and I teach first aid over there. And the one injury that a lot of folks don't think about in skiing, doesn't happen every day, but one that we get nervous about a lot is that all of the skis people use have a razor sharp edge. Those folks that are over there training for racing, they're sharpening their skis every day. Every now and again, a ski will pop off in a crash, come right up along somebody's leg, and fillet them right over. And it's thankfully not a common injury, but it's one that we worry about pretty often. The other thing that we get concerned about, somebody hits something at a high rate of speed, femur injuries, and of course we get concerned about anything that has to do with that femoral artery. There's a big blood vessel that runs right down the inside of our leg, big around as your pinky finger. And if that one gets severed, we've got some severe bleeding that can happen really, really quickly. Same thing here on the brachial artery on the inside of your leg. So the type of bleeding we're talking about today, these are not paper cuts. These are big-time wounds. What we're going to know is probably blood pooling around the person, squirting. Each time there's a heartbeat, right? We know we've got an arterial bleed because it's squirting from the wound, and you'll actually see each time it pumps. But what you'll also notice is this is a system that relies on pressure. Our blood pressure, right? So we have to have enough pressure in the system to circulate our blood. And as we lose blood volume, as there's not enough water in the hose, what starts to happen is, when you're at my house, if you're the third person to get a shower in the morning, and that tank, the pressure tank, starts to go down, the first person gets a nice blast of water in the morning. By the time it gets to the third person, it gets to be a little more of a trickle. And so as we run out of blood volume, you start to notice that pressure and the ability of the body to compensate for the injury starts to go down. So what we need to do is we've got to kink the hose off so we can preserve that pressure and keep blood circulating around the body. So we're identifying these are serious, significant wounds, but definitely the kinds of things other folks here mentioned that they had been on the ambulance over the years. Not all that uncommon in a bad car accident. These things unfortunately happen. We're going to talk about a couple different zones of the body while we do this, because we've got our limbs, right, from our shoulders out to the tips of our fingers, and we've got our legs. If I'm going to have a really significant bleed, I'd like those to be the places on my body where it occurs, because it's a place that I can do a lot about it. We've got places here where we can shut off the blood all the way down our legs. We've got places here where we can shut off the blood all the way down our hands, as opposed to something here on our core, which is much harder to do something about, probably going to require hospital intervention. We can't put a tourniquet around somebody's stomach. Can't put a tourniquet, my wife might like to, but put a tourniquet around any bleeding on my neck. So if we're going to have this type of an injury, we'd like it to be somewhere out on our extremities. The two ways that we can control bleeding out on our arms and legs is that we can use direct pressure, or we can use the tourniquet there, or we can use spotting bandage if we happen to have it around. Direct pressure, what do I mean by that? So we've identified some bleeding. I knew it since kindergarten that if you've got a paper cut, pressure works. Pressure works. Because we know, what do? We get a paper cut. Anybody gets a paper cut, grab a hold of it and you squeeze it. Put pressure on that, it aids the clotting process. Within a few minutes, we end up, that wound will start to clot, blood will start to, platelets come in there and clot that wound up. Now the two things that you also learn about, you learn about those wounds, you don't want to peek, because as soon as you take a peek, it starts bleeding again, right? So these principles apply. Apply pressure, don't peek. If we peek, it'll start bleeding again. We'll disrupt that clotting process. So when we talk about direct pressure, when it comes to this type of a wound, I've got a leg here that we're going to practice with a little bit. This leg has some simulated wounds on it. There's a pretty good laceration right on down to the bone. But when I'm talking about the direct pressure that we might need to stop this kind of significant bleeding, meaning I don't have a tourniquet handy, I don't have anything else I can use, I'm going to take off your shirt, take off anything that you have, something extra, grab some gauze. We're going to cover that wound up, and I'm going to use the heel of my hand, and I'm going to apply really serious pressure, and I'm going to keep it on. But if you notice, I'm using the heel of my hand, and it's going to take some significant pressure on these types of wounds, and you're going to put that pressure on it, you're going to hold it there until help arrives. If it starts to bleed through the bandage that you have, you can take another one, put it on top of the bandage that you're using. We don't want to lift it up. That's like taking a peek, right? It's going to stop the clotting process and let the bleeding start all over. So we've got a bandage over the wound, applying pressure. If it starts to bleed through, we're going to take another bandage, put it over the top of the one we're using, and apply some pressure. Now, some things that probably should have said first. We need to protect ourselves. On our buses, I'm assuming that everyone has a stocked up first aid kit on every one of our buses. And I'm going to guess that inside that first aid kit, we've got gloves. If it's a commercial first aid kit, they usually will have a couple pairs of gloves, a pair of scissors, some bandages. They'll have an eye shield. A lot of the time for persons who don't wear glasses, there'll be an eye shield that you can protect yourself. Pretty common stuff that you're going to find in there. So make sure you're protecting yourself. What if I don't have clean bandages? Should you be concerned about using your shirt? No. Surgeon that trained me here, because someone asked a question, well, what about infection? What if I use my shirt and I'm holding pressure and introduce an infection? This person is likely to die if you do not intervene. The surgeon that trained me said, when they get to the hospital, this person is going to get bombed with antibiotics. So being concerned about whether or not the bandage that you're using is perfectly sterile, we don't want to go and grab a grease rag if we have something better. But don't be totally concerned that this wasn't a sterile bandage. This person's in deeper trouble than that, and we have some very powerful antibiotics. When they get to the hospital, it's going to be completely cleaned and cleaned out, fixed up. So we got that. We've got that technique of applying pressure. Pretty significant pressure. We're going to hold it on. We're going to keep it on until help arrives, until 911 gets there. If we happen to be lucky enough to have a tourniquet, and I'd probably argue this would be a nice thing to have in any of your first aid kits on the bus. Works just the same way. Anybody that was in Scouts when they were younger, you probably remember a triangular bandage. They would have you take a stick. You'd use the stick, right? You tie the bandage around, use the stick, tighten it up, then tie the two tails of the stick over it. These work very much the same way, but these are commercial models. This one's called a CAT-T. This one is pretty commonplace in first aid kits. This is the one that we use over at Elk Mountain. All of us carry this in our packs. It's also the one that recently the state police adopted. They all carry them now on their belts. If you remember about a year and a half ago, Trooper Seth Kelly, a gentleman from over at Pleasantville, when he was a little kid, he rode on the school bus with me to school every day. He was in a situation down along the highway in Bethlehem where he did a traffic stop, guy pops out of the car and starts shooting at him, hits him in the leg along the highway. I forget which what highway would that be, Brian? Between Bethlehem and Easton. So is it, yeah, somewhere right along there, 33. So what Seth did, he had a tourniquet. Unfortunately, it was in his first aid kit in the trunk of his cruiser. And so he didn't have it on his person. But what he did is he took his belt off and he cinched his belt up and put a tourniquet on himself just about the time he went over the guardrail and passed out. And it's probably the thing that saved his life. Had he not done that, he would have bled out right there alongside the highway. It was a lifesaver. Since then, the state police decided, you know what, these tourniquets don't do a whole lot of good inside the cruiser where we can't use them, and they're now putting them on their belts. But Seth he was just from over in Pleasant Mountain, Forest City kid. So the way these work, they're real simple. You're just going to slide it onto the limb that's affected. It's Velcro all the way around, so what you're going to do, pull this thing tight as you can get it on the limb. Now today when we practice with these, we're not going to crank them up because we don't want to risk doing any damage on anyone. But in the actual use of this device, you're cranking this thing out. You're gonna pull this as tight as you can get it, or whatever else it is that you have, and then you're going to turn this. This acts like the stick on the old tourniquets. You're going to continue to turn this, called the windlass. Turn it and continue to turn it until the bleeding stops. So we know we have enough pressure. We know that we've created enough pressure in the tourniquet when we've kinked off the hose enough for the bleeding to stop. Just like when you're kinking your hose in the backyard. We know that we've taken, what happens is that blood vessel that runs right up through here, the brachial artery, this is a really good spot to apply a tourniquet because we've got the humerus bone right here. When we put all that pressure on, it just pinches it pinches that blood vessel right up against the bone, and it can control the bleeding all the way down the arm. Now, the rules will say, when we get a little further in here, at least a couple inches above the injury. The surgeon that trained me said, go high and tight. You can't go wrong if you go high and tight. It takes care of the whole extremity. So, high and tight. Right up in here, we know, sometimes some people might have been trained in like pressure points, or when you take a first aid class and they talk about somebody with heat illness and you want to cool them down. You know, where are the places on the body where you put the cold packs to cool somebody with heat illness down? You go here, and you go here, and you go here, because it's places where we have major blood supply close to the surface that we can get at. So these are places where we can shut that blood supply off. So we're going to lock this. The neat thing about these is you almost can't do it wrong. When you open up the package, there's instructions if you forget, but put it on tight. It doesn't matter what direction you turn this. It will lock going either way. So if someone should ever get nervous, just do that. Put this over the top. Lock that over. You put the time on it so that the EMS folks, when they get there, know how long it's been on there. And when they get a person to the hospital, they're going to know what kind of care that person is going to need to have provided. So that's it. If the first one doesn't work, take another one, slide it right up next to it, and apply a second tourniquet if the first one didn't shut off the bleeding. I was working with my daughter and her Girl Scout troop, and the Girl Scouts were learning how to do this. And they, how tight do you put the tourniquet? The bleeding stops. It's simple. You know it's tight enough when the bleeding stops. It'll stop. So that's tourniquet. Works well on the extremities. So we've got pressure. We've got tourniquets. We've got two types of tourniquets, actually. This one, you'll find these in some first aid kits. A little bit less expensive, but they do work. These, want to help me out for a second? The way this one works is it's just an elastic band like a surgeon would use inside, they use these in the OR. Go ahead and just grab that. Each time you go around, you're going to stretch it more. Go ahead and yank it again, stretch it some more. My fingers turn white, you know we did it right. That's good enough, I think. When you get all the way, I think it's good enough. When you get all the way to the end with one of these, you just tuck it under. And it's rubbery enough that it'll just stick if you tuck it under. So some first aid kits, you might pull one of these out. Little kids on a bus, these are kind of handy because you cut it in two. And you can make multiple tourniquets out of one. with these stretchy ones, and it'll get the job done. These are pretty cheap. I think they're maybe $5, $6 a piece. And a lot of the first aid kits, you'll find them there. Other things will work. Use a belt, use a handkerchief, triangular bandage. A lot of times you'll find those in a first aid kit. You can use a triangular bandage and a stick, whatever you got. But definitely the kind of thing that can save a life. The kind of thing that we hope we never have to do, right? We do all these first aid trainings all the time, and we spend a lot of time teaching this stuff. We hope we never need it, but we also know that accidents can happen. Like I said, having grown up on a dairy farm, I think about all the times where we had a close call, where you're working around tractors and farm machinery and cattle and that sort of thing. I mean, I can think of more than once where you walked away and you just said, you know what, today that was close and today wasn't my day. And I'm certain if you've worked around a bus garage long enough and you've been tearing apart big machines and all that sort of thing, the same sorts of things happen. It's just the way it goes. But definitely could be a life-saving intervention. Now, the other thing that a lot of first aid kits have in them now that's really kind of neat. Quick clot. This is a hemostatic bandage, meaning it's a blood clotting bandage. These have become pretty commonplace. You can buy it, CVS, Rite Aid, you can buy these. They come in first aid kits that you might buy. This was developed, again, over the last 25 or 30 years, and it's become commonplace in EMS. What it is, it's a specially coated bandage. When you open one of these up, this one's called combat gauze. When you open one up, it comes out in sort of a folded bandage. What's on it is there's a special dressing on this bandage that aids the clotting process. So the way it was kind of described to me is the stuff that's on here, it helps your body to create almost like a little screen over the wound. And then what happens is it allows our blood to clot that wound much faster. This is something that all of our military service personnel would have these on them. In their backpacks, in their pockets. This stuff is a lifesaver. Sometimes, if you have an older first aid kit, you might find a packet of this stuff. Rather than a treated bandage, looks almost like a salt. Now, most of that's probably expired by this point. They don't make it that way anymore. Now it's just these bandages that are sort of coated with it. But you might also see it in the form of like a salt that you could sprinkle onto something. So you crack one of these open. What you're going to find in there is bandage that comes out. The way that it comes out, I'm reusing this one for training. This one was not coated with this stuff. It's just a training bandage. But the way that it comes out is kind of folded up like an accordion. The purpose of this stuff is that we want to, and when and where do we use it? So on the extremities, we can use a tourniquet and kink the hose on. In the junctures of our body. So the places that we can't get a tourniquet, but we still could have significant bleeding. And if you look at this diagram up here, there are places where a tourniquet won't work because we can't get there with a tourniquet. That's where we can pack the wound with this stuff, and we can stop a significant bleed by packing the wound. So you can see the mannequin there on the right-hand side. They're packing the wound in the shoulder. This picture here shows, and this would be the most difficult place for us to do any good. This is showing some gunshot wounds to the torso. That's the person that needs surgical intervention. So we've got pressure, we've got tourniquets, we've got the bandage. We can try to use some of the bandage, but in the case that somebody's got any kind of injuries to their internal organs, what we want to do is make sure we identify that person to EMS services first, because they got to get out. The person with a tourniquet on, if we've stopped the bleeding, they probably have some time if they haven't lost a whole lot of blood. The person that's got any kind of wounds to the torso, they're going to need to be the first person to go. Something you're probably going to, in the building here, I should note, and we've started to install these, the hospital's done it, the courthouse has done it, we've added public bleeding kits. Any place we have an AED in the building, above it we have a black bag. In that black bag we have tourniquets, we have bandages, we've got quick clot bandages, gloves, scissors, all the stuff that we would need in a severe emergency. And again, I think this is 22 or 23 years for me in the school system. If you would have told me when I was a 22-year-old just coming out of college that I would even be talking about these sorts of things in the school environment, I just never would have believed it. But it was just a few years after I started teaching that the situation happened in Columbine in Colorado. And I hope that none of those black bags that we installed ever get moved. I hope all the thing they ever do is collect dust. I hope your first aid kit never moves from the front and the back of your bus. But we also know that we don't want to wake up on the day that an accident does happen and say, you know, I had this idea that maybe I ought to know how to use this stuff, but we didn't learn how. So we're going to look for life-threatening bleeding. We're going to get our first aid kit. We're going to dial 911. We're going to use clean cloth or gauze or whatever we've got to apply some pressure. Use a tourniquet if we need to. There's the person applying pressure. If we have a tourniquet and it's on the limb, I like to show this picture because it gives you an indication of how tight that tourniquet needs to be. When I look at that picture, what it tells me is it's going to be uncomfortable. Now, the person that you're applying this to, if they've lost any amount of blood, they're probably already getting shocky. They're not going to be giving you a hard time. But you need to know that this thing needs to be applied uncomfortably tight. And you can see from that picture the type of wound we're talking about, but again, you can also see how tight that tourniquet has to be. You know, accidents happen. I was talking to one of our teacher's aides the other day, came back from the summer. Her husband, innocently enough, was painting their porch, had some scaffolding set up alongside the porch. He was all done for the day, done with the painting job, and it was one of those scaffolds where you put the sections together and you can do multiple tiers of sections to build the scaffold. He was taking them down, and as he was taking one out, lost his balance, falls off the scaffold, and it came down, and the extension that comes out the bottom of the scaffold right through his leg and out the other side. And significant bleeding. She put a tourniquet on. She did this training last year. I don't know whether or not it totally needed a tourniquet, but we know that he's okay. He's okay, and he had a serious puncture. It didn't hurt anything, but we know it didn't get any worse. So she came in and told me that the other day. So we've applied the tourniquets. Those are the ones just like we have here. I don't know if it shows the rubberized one. Just the way I demoed it. We're all going to practice with that so you get a chance to try it out. A couple things with tourniquets when we get to practice. Once we apply it, we keep it on. They won't take it off until the hospital. So once we apply it, it's on, we leave it. Most of the time somebody's getting to the hospital from around here in an hour and a half at the most, and then they'll take care of them when they get there. If the first one doesn't get the job done, put a second one on. Continue to use it. If it needs to be uncomfortably tight. Those are the things to remember with tourniquets. Now I want to show you how this bandage works. And you can see there somebody's gloved up and they're packing that wound. Here's what I wanted to show you about. I wanted to show you in the demo. This bandage comes out of the package, and when it does, it's kind of folded up like an accordion. Now remember, this is all coated with that special dressing, right? It's all coated. It's going to feel a little bit, almost like it's got a little bit of, feels a little Vaseline, like it's kind of a little bit greasy when it comes out of the package. Going to put it in the wound. You're going to use a little sense of urgency here. But the key learning here is to make sure we want to get that bandage up and against all of the little bleeding blood vessels that are inside that wound, right? So when you look up there at that diagram, you can see that that cut's gone pretty deep. We got to make sure that that special dressing is getting up against all of those surfaces. So our goal here is to get the bandage in there, pack this wound full, and make sure all of the surfaces are contacted with this dressing. When you look up here, you see that we don't want to just set it up on top, because that's not getting that dressing down in there where it needs to. We're going to serve two purposes. We're going to get that special dressing in contact with all the little bleeding blood vessels that are down in there. And the other thing we're doing is we're creating pressure on the inside. So we're building pressure from the inside to pack that wound full of this dressing. And the thing that I learned when I did this is these wounds can be pretty big. This one kind of simulates a big, deep cut. And what I found was, when you do this properly, you can fit a lot of this bandage down into a wound. And what I want you to do when you practice this is kind of use a couple of fingers and make sure you're filling all the little nooks and crannies in this wound and you're stuffing it in there. Because that whole big long bandage will get an entire one inside of a wound. And so that's we're going to take an opportunity to practice that. But the thing that I'd like you to kind of experience is get that feeling of taking a couple of fingers and getting it way down in there and filling that void in there. Just like that picture shows, we want to make sure we fill that whole void as opposed to just putting the bandage up on top. Any questions so far? All right, here's what we're going to do. Mr. Deck just came in. Greg Deck is our SRO in the back. He helps me out teaching these classes from time to time. What we're going to do is let's divide up into a couple of stations here. One of them can be the wound packing station here, where you can use this. We'll use this fake leg, give everybody a chance to just kind of feel that experience of putting the bandage in there. And then we've got a couple of training tourniquets here. If everyone would just divide up into a couple of groups, everybody take an opportunity to just come up and we'll practice putting these on each other a little bit. While we practice, remember, we don't want to crank it up so tight that we could risk hurting anyone, but certainly you can get the idea of how they go on, how they work, how they can be applied. Super simple. Something that, like I said, we're teaching kids to do this. And I think our kids are outdoorsmen. They're out hunting and fishing and four-wheeling and doing all kinds of stuff where there's not immediate help around. No reason why they can't learn how to do these sorts of things if they ever got themselves in trouble somewhere out on the, what's it called, the $1 Million Highway out there with the four-wheeling. That's a long way from home sometimes. So if you want to come down, we'll use a couple different types of tourniquets. We'll split up into a couple of groups, and everybody gets a chance to practice.